Spring practice is all about developing players, but at the same time, maybe the number one goal is just to keep everyone healthy and make it on through the 15 sessions. Unable to do that at Georgia with their number one receiver, George Pickens, suffering an ACL tear on Tuesday. He will require surgery. Let's get more information here from Palmer Toms from Dogs 247 Sports. Palmer, how you doing today?
Doing well. It's been a busy day covering this breaking news. We received word of it about around midday with the official release coming from Georgia right at noon. Football SID Claude Felton sent out the email with, word that George Pickens suffered a non-contact injury on Tuesday in Georgia's fourth practice of spring drills, torn ACL, and something that'll require surgery. He's already started his pre-op rehab process with the UGA sports medicine staff, Ron Corson, who stays busy over there with all the injuries that Georgia's had over the last couple of seasons. But it's certainly a tough blow for Georgia, and you hate it to see a kid like that. George Pickens, someone who really does enjoy going out playing football. Looks to have a bright future for himself. Playing professionally. You hate to see it for a kid like that. The good news, and this came from Kirby Smart, he said, the good news is that the MRI that they, got this morning showed that it was an isolated injury, so no other structures were involved, just the ACL, which, obviously is something that you like to hear when a player suffers a knee injury, that it's not, dipping into the MCL, meniscus, other areas of the knee.
Based on ACL injuries and then the aftermath of the rehab after surgery, it seems to put George Pickens in a timetable of possibly being able to come back late in the season. It seems to take 8, 9 to 10 months, something in that range.
Yeah, if you look around college football, ACLs, it's kind of a crapshoot in terms of, how long it's going to take. You look at recent surgeries that have been done, and the timeline seems to have sped up some. Amari Rodgers is the name that comes to mind. The Clemson receiver suffered a injury like this on March 25th, 2019, and was back on the field for week 2 against Texas A&M. You look at the year before that, Auburn had a pair of wide receivers that went down with a torn ACL as well. Will Hastings and Eli Stove, those two were back within 6 months. So, I think the fact that this was isolated just to the ACL, that's got to be a good sign in terms of, getting this process sped up. But, like you said, the normal timeline, for an ACL injury is somewhere between 8 to 10 months. So you kind of look at that 9-month range as an estimate. That would put him back in December, would be late season. And at that point, you got to wonder what's going through his head. Does he want to rush it back and, play in some late season football? It obviously depends on what kind of football, what the stakes are at that point for Georgia, whether they're playing SEC championship, college football playoffs, or, if it's just a, normal bowl game, big, New Year's Six bowl game, you don't expect a kid like that to rush back to, get on the field and maybe jeopardize his future. My guess is that we probably won't see him play another snap at Georgia. He's a guy that's, one of the top receivers in this 2022 NFL draft class already. And I think that more than likely he's not going to rush the process and really focus on getting healthy ahead of the NFL draft and preparing for his professional career.
And that's too bad for Georgia fans in seeing what could possibly have happened here, because you've got a 5-star that comes onto campus, leads the team in receiving as a true freshman, 49 catches. Then he comes back in 2020, gets off to a slow start, but once they fix the quarterback situation, get JT Daniels in play, he catches, out of his 36 receptions, catches 23 in 4 games with almost all of his touchdowns with JT Daniels at quarterback. A lot of good words out there, and you would be able to expound upon this far more than I can about the testament to his hard work during the offseason, how much he matured and was growing as a player. You combine that again with his talent with JT Daniels throwing the football downfield, and who knows what the season could have looked like for him this year.
Yeah, I mean, you bring it up right there with JT Daniels and the impact that he had on George Pickens, and the connection was there. You saw those two, really bond. I think you talked to Daniels after that, after his first start against Mississippi State. He was like, I feel confident throwing it up to George. I know that George is a guy that I can throw it up to, and 99% of the time he's going to come down with it. Pickens had his two biggest games of the season in the last two outings against Missouri and Cincinnati. Went over 100 yards in both of those contests. And like you said, finished as the leading receiver his freshman year. Essentially finished as the leading receiver his sophomore year as well. Had the same number of receptions as Kyrus Jackson. Both those guys had 36 receptions. Kyrus had 514 yards. George had 513. But the real edge there was that Pickens brought in 6 touchdowns to Jackson's 3, and the fact that Pickens only played in 8 games, so his average was higher as well. So you definitely looked at him as the best receiver on this Georgia team the last 2 years. And going in, and one of the best receivers in college football going into his 3rd year. I think that expectations certainly were high for him and for this Georgia offense as a whole. I mentioned to you before we came on the air, but Kirby Smart said this Georgia offense is light years ahead of where they were last year. I think that's a combination of the experience factor of Daniels. A year ago, he wasn't even in the transfer portal. He had no clue that he was going to end up at Georgia. Wasn't working with Todd Monken. That's another person who's around for a second year. This offense was just getting more and more and more comfortable, and George Pickens was absolutely going to be a big part of that. Whether it was, him getting the ball or him drawing attention away from Georgia's other receivers. And now, you look at those other guys that I'm sure we'll bring up here in a couple minutes, but, the attention is going to be on those guys, whereas they would have been a secondary option, in terms of the defense's attention and focus. Pickens was drawing double teams, and that opened things up for Kyrus Jackson, who had some big games early on in the season. It opened things up for a young guy like Jermaine Burton, who developed and came along and is, likely going to be filling, one of those outside receiver roles that Pickens is leaving behind.